Good morning, everyone. This is Justin Foster, the co-CMO at Loop One. This is our second webinar this year in a series that we're doing that brings more collective intelligence to the work that you all do. And so going to go ahead and get started here. This is being recorded and will be available if you've registered or attended, you will automatically be emailed a link to the webinar. And we will also be posting to our YouTube channel and our blog on our website. So in case you don't know about Loop One, we believe that truth is insight and that you just need to look at it with different eyes. And we call our approach to this engineered insights. And this means it's our expert methodology to look past the noise and find the data that really matters, and then giving you direct visibility to it. We call this the Loop One mind, and it's the collective intelligence of our team, like our subject matter expert today, Marc Netterfield, and then our network of clients and partners. And one of the cool things about the Loop One mind is that every time someone joins Loop One, either as an employee or a customer or a partner, we all get smarter. So we use this collective intelligence. We tap into it and refine and refine and streamline the overall function of IT. And as you know, we have instructor-led classroom training. We provide on-site, remote, and professional services, managed services, and enterprise software delivered to you in a very human way, warmth, experience, and a sense of humor. And part of what we believe is that we get you because we are you. And so I'm excited today to introduce our subject matter expert, Marc Netterfield. Marc is a professional services engineer here at Loop One, and he assists Loop One customers in deploying, upgrading, or customizing their SolarWinds IT monitoring tools. He has many years of experience working with operations team and a rare talent of quickly gathering a solid understanding of the client environment. He then helps them to see which aspects of their infrastructure are providing the most value in monitoring and how to best bring that information to their attention. Marc was recently named an MVP on THWAC and is known for his level of knowledge and contributions to the SolarWinds community. Good morning, Marc.
Thank you for that introduction.
You're welcome. So those of you that are listening in live, you have access to a control panel. Just a couple of housekeeping things related to the control panel. If you have a question, you hit the question section and type it, and we will have Q&A at the end, towards the end of Marc's presentation or discussion today. But go ahead and as you have questions, post them, and we will try to get to every one of them. If we don't have time to get to your question, we are still capturing it, and someone from the Loop One team will be back in touch to get that question answered for you. You can also use the chat box, and then throughout the session, there's going to be 3 polls, and they'll be obvious. They'll come up on the screen that Marc will trigger in accordance with the flow of his presentation. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Marc.
Okay, thanks. So just as the slide says, and as Justin introduced, my name is Marc Netterfield. I'm a field systems engineer with Loop One. I've worked on pretty much all of the SolarWinds products that are out there these days. As he said, recently nominated named as a THWAC MVP, so that was pretty exciting for me. And in my real life, basically all I do is grow and eat vegetables. So that's pretty much what I'm about. Let's go ahead and jump right in here and start talking about the dashboarding. So as you guys are probably aware, dashboards are a very popular request at Loop One on the engagements that I do. I don't think anyone has any Orion engagements that I work on where we don't talk about dashboarding and run through probably several examples. Sometimes I'll do an engagement where that's all they need is just build me this stack of dashboards. I have requirements from different teams within my organization, and you know, they know that I can knock them out, and so then that's what they're looking for. So talking a little bit about why we might use a dashboard here. You see a couple different examples of types of dashboards that I'll commonly find that we need to build. So we'll have overviews of the environment, just kind of, what's going on out there across the board. That's your out of the box default Orion summary home is a pretty typical example of that. It just gives you kind of an assortment of stats that are relevant overall. I use them a lot for on-demand reporting. So the idea there is that there's a lot of information that I just want to get the latest stats for and just to be able to keep an eye on it throughout the day. For example, typically if I'm working in an environment for a long time, there's a view that I'll build. I use it as my SW admin view, and that's all geared towards making sure that the application SolarWinds is specifically performing the way that I want it to, keeping an eye out for common pitfalls and things that someone might have misconfigured, or if you've got a big enough environment, you have several different users in the environment, and keeping an eye on what other people might be changing out there can be pretty helpful. So I tend to build dashboards like that for me to just keep up on my screen so that I know what's going on. Then the next idea here is alert noise reduction. So there are, especially out of the box, there are a good number of alerts that when I get those alerts, I find that they're not super immediately pressing. Like there's just as an example, when you install vman, there's a bunch of alerts associated with VM tools not being updated or not being installed or not running. And so those tools, they're useful information and they can be very relevant, but I'm not going to one by one go through there and address all of these, hundreds of emails for all the VMs across my entire environment. So what I'll do is I'll just add that information to a dashboard and then, aggregate it all together. And then when I'm in that place in my schedule where I can sit down and decide, okay, I'm going to clean up some VMs, or I'm going to get VM tools pushed out to everybody, I've got a big list there, a to-do list that I can work through rather than having to hunt through my inbox and figure out that I've got like 900 machines out there that need to be updated. So well-designed dashboard can really cut down on the number of alerts that you need to actually get in your inbox. And then that way you can focus on, if it hits my inbox, my thought process is it better be something that I need to deal with right now. If it can wait until later, then I probably need it as a report at the end of the day or the start of the day, So then also, you pretty commonly will build dashboards that focus your attention on a specific subset of the environment or related metrics. So that would be like your DBA dashboards or your app team dashboards, network engineering, WAN interfaces, just if there's kind of a category that you want everything to all go together, then that's very common request for dashboards. And then another use case for dashboards is that you want to show the relationships between things, especially across different products within the SolarWinds suite. So just as an example, if you have the full set of everything that you can run from SolarWinds, then you'll have your NPM that'll collect network metrics, and then SAM will be collecting application metrics, and then you might have vman collecting hypervisor layer stuff, and then you'll have information coming in from WPM transactions that are going against the web servers that all those applications are tied to. So there's all these different pieces, and especially in the out-of-the-box configuration, they don't necessarily all end up in the same place together, partially because the developers at SolarWinds don't know that you're going to have all of the pieces all the time, so they kind of silo things off a little bit. But if you're building out a good dashboard, then you can bring that all together and say, this is, for example, an easy one that I'll usually do is this is everything related to SolarWinds. And so I'll get all of the servers because I know those for someone's environment, and we'll set up a few WPM transactions and kind of stack all that information together in one place so that I can say, comprehensively, this is everything that would have to do with my SolarWinds application. So there's some pretty common mistakes that I'll find when I see people's dashboards. A lot of times, a lot of clients will have really barely even touched them. They will just have some out-of-the-box stuff, and they felt like that was good enough. And it's a fair starting point, but if you ask even the SolarWinds, their product engineers and such, they always consider everything that comes from them out of the box to be just an example that they would hope that you would be able to build on. One of the main strengths of SolarWinds as a monitoring tool over a lot of the other tools that are out there is that you can make very custom tailored views, and the dashboarding is pretty efficient. You can get a lot of information packed in there in really neat ways that it's very hard to do with some other tools. It's an extremely open platform. Anything that you want to put on there, you can usually find some way to get that information into the product and then onto your dashboard so that you have visibility into it. So leaving it just as it is out of the box is kind of really selling yourself short and not taking advantage of the product as it is. So some of the things that you will want to try to avoid, though, when you're building out dashboards or in refining the ones that came from the out of the box, is that you don't want to have too much noise. So noise in this case, I'm talking about, just a lot of objects on the screen that aren't really relevant or aren't actionable. It's just there, and every time you go to that dashboard, you scroll right past it. And so if you think that, like, if you're looking at a screen and you watch the people who are interacting with that screen, and the first thing that they do is just scroll to the bottom, then that right there tells you that there's a bunch of stuff on that screen that's probably not relevant to them that they just have to skip over. So that's noise. It's just wasting, distracting you from what you need to focus on. And then clutter. In this case, there's a lot of times where I find people will add resources to a view that maybe they make the view look good in terms of like the layout, and it makes things look maybe even and symmetrical, things like that. But at the end of the day, like, is that information that you're going to be able to use? And is it going to help drive you toward a solution if you have any issues? And a lot of times when you really sit down and take a look at it, there's a lot of resources that you can cut off the view and kind of make things a little bit tighter. My thought process for dashboards is that you don't really want to have to scroll through 5 or 6 pages of information on any dashboard. If you've got that much data, you probably need to split it up into a couple dashboards or different tabs on the dashboard, because just as a basic thing, the SolarWinds default is to refresh the page every 5 minutes. And so if you have to scroll like 3/4 of the way down a page to get to what you need to, and then after a minute or two the page is going to refresh, then that's just going to break your flow and move you away from the information that you're interested in seeing. So trying to keep things tight is a really important goal to set. And then excessive admin overhead is a big one too, and I work a lot on that. I see a lot of environments where someone will go in and they put in 4 or 5 hours developing a dashboard for one team. And then if you have done a good job, then that team is going to use that dashboard, and someone else who sits next to them in their cubicle is going to look over and say like, oh, hey man, how'd you get that dashboard? I need something like that. And so you're going to start getting more requests for them. And pretty soon, if you're not a full-time SolarWinds admin, then you're going to be buried with all these requests, and you're going to have to just start telling people no. So that's not what we want to be able to do. And most people, I would say, are not full-time SolarWinds admins. It's one of many tasks that they have to deal with. So you don't want to make the dashboards too much work to deal with. And there's a lot of techniques that you can do that will make it a little bit easier to kind of manage all of that. So I'll try to show you some of those things. The main one that I find is a lot of times people will go in there and put filters on each individual resource in the entire view, rather than just applying a view limitation. So, I'll show you guys that in a little bit when we get to the demonstration part. And then don't leave issues unaddressed. So that's, you see a lot of times that people will have default resources on there, or they'll just have a lot of down nodes, or whatever the case may be. There's things sit on the dashboard and the information becomes stale. And while that's happening, the end users are getting accustomed to just going to this dashboard and like half the page is red, or there's little gray dots everywhere because things aren't being monitored properly and they haven't been configured. And so they just get used to that, and then they start tuning out the data that's on the screen, or it makes it harder for them to sift through it all so that they can actually figure out what is actionable and what can they do something with. So if you see that half of your SAM templates haven't been configured correctly, then you really do need to try to prioritize getting that information sorted out and off of the dashboard and cleaned up so that everything is polling correctly, and so that you can get everything that you can out of it. You don't want your people to start to disregard the information that you're putting in front of them. Okay. So then talking a little bit about what some of the qualities that can make a really good dashboard. Focusing on pain points is a big one. Pretty much at the front and center of your screen, you want to make sure that anything that's going to impact your business is right there immediately at the top, because you don't want people to have to hunt through things. You don't want them to have to scroll down to the bottom to find something that's going to be immediately relevant. In the out-of-the-box templates, for example, down nodes tends to be near the very top of the screen, because if any node is down, that's more than likely an issue within SolarWinds. So you want to keep an eye out for your pain points and then build your dashboards to reflect that. And the different pain points kind of vary from one organization to another. Some people have flaky network connections because they have remote sites that are on construction sites or in third world country kind of things. So those are the sorts of scenarios where you know that you have to keep an eye on that information so that you can fix it as soon as it happens and it's a recurring issue. And then leads troubleshooting. So the idea here with making sure that your dashboard leads the troubleshooting is that if you have thought through the process and you figure out what is the symptom that lets you know that something's wrong. So maybe if you have SAM, that would be some end user experiences, or even if you're just doing basic NPM monitoring, then if an entire branch office has gone offline, whatever those kind of really important scenarios that you need to keep an eye out for are, then you would try to build out a flow on the screen so that maybe the first section would be the symptom that you're trying to alleviate for your users. And then the other resources that you load onto the screen should be additional metrics and different kinds of tests that would maybe help to resolve the issue and let you know where exactly in the process you have that pain point. So for example, if you're keeping an eye on a network path, then if you actually draw out using Network Atlas or other tools, you can draw out the path between your corporate office and this remote office and all the key junctions, your VPN firewalls and stuff, and however it is that they're connecting. Then that way, when the issue comes up, you'll see, this branch office is down, and then ideally you would have the little diagram or whatever the resource is that shows you all of the hops between here and there, so you can see exactly where the failure is going on. And then at the last part of the screen, you might want to have some kind of confirmation, or if you can, come up with some way to validate that the issue has been resolved, so that way just really following across the screen lets the techs and the help desk and whoever's looking at the screen know exactly, this is the problem I'm trying to fix. These are the steps I need to take to address that problem. And then this would be the end state where I know that that problem has been successfully addressed. So if you can build out a workflow like that, then that will make it so that it's a lot easier for your team to improve those mean times to resolution, so that you can keep your business users happy and keep the performance of your systems top notch. So then prioritization, right? You need to have the important things right at the top, and then figure out if there's any way that you can push the less relevant or the less common things kind of off to the sides, or there's different ways that you can kind of hide things that aren't as important. And I'll show you some of those things. And so you just want to make sure that if it's on that screen, it's something that's actually useful. And then the idea there too, actionable, is that can I do something about this? Just as an example, out of the box, the SQL, the App Insight for SQL template, tends to have a lot of critical and warning indicators for almost every environment that I ever work in. And so I'll usually go through that and talk to the DBAs, and you'll find out that depending on the database, if it's a homegrown developed app, then the DBAs can actually change the way that the database is configured, or they can talk to the developers and we can figure out if there's inefficient queries. We can make improvements. But if you're monitoring a database that's part of a vendor provided solution and you don't really have a lot of control over what goes on inside of that database, it's a little bit of a black box for you. You just set it out there and it works as well as it works, and that's all there is to it. If that's the case, then you would probably want to adjust your thresholds. Don't alert on anything that you can't actually address. Then focus on the things that you can. So in the case of a SQL monitor, the only things that you have control over on these vendor supplied databases might be the resources on the server. So you would really keep an eye out for any of the metrics that indicate that you have a resource bottleneck, because that's something that you can actually take action and fix. And then templatized for easy deployment. That's a big one for me. If you are strategic with how you put these things together, you don't have to build your dashboards as a one-off, right? If you build a good dashboard for the network team, then the server admins are probably going to come back to you and say like, oh, hey, I'd like a dashboard like that. So then if you have built your dashboards in such a way that you can make a clone of the dashboard, apply a view limitation to it, maybe change 3 or 4 resources around because, in my experience, you'll find that network team is very focused on maybe the physical distribution of things. So they want to know what's the site and the location where things are and organizes everything based on these physical relationships. But then on the server team, they tend to be a lot more fluid in where things physically are. They might have multiple data centers and data just kind of moves between them, but they're very interested in maybe operating systems and which version of Windows is installed on this and what applications does it support. So we can just go in there and make 2 or 3 filter changes and adjust it so that instead of organizing by location, we organize by application. And then that kind of setup makes it just a lot more efficient for you to roll out lots of dashboards, which is once you get good at them, people start asking for them all the time. And then embedding intelligence. This tends to be a more advanced topic. I don't find that a lot of people are doing this on their own, but when I'm working with them, I try to build this in as much as possible so that when we're building out, if you're using maybe a custom query to gather a set of information, then while you're at it, you can use case logic in the query that just says, if this and this and this have happened, then go ahead and just put a comment on there that says that, this is what you need to do to fix this. There's also, just even on the simpler side, you can add in little HTML resources that show like a legend or a key that explains, when this application goes down, then these are the impacted parties and this is what's going on. And then as long as you've got that on the screen, then when the application goes down, the people that are viewing the desktop or the dashboard are able to take a look and say like, okay, I see this is happening and this is the information that I need to either how to fix it or who do I need to notify or kind of where do I go from here. So you can add that all into the dashboard directly. And what's nice about adding all the information within SolarWinds is that when you have maybe new people in your organization, then they don't have to, it's not as hard for them to get onboarded. I ran into that really badly. At the first environment I ever worked on SolarWinds, it was a casino chain, and we would tend to have a lot of new guys coming in really often. And with the way that the training program was set up, honestly, a new guy wouldn't be able to address problems independently until they had been around for several months. It took them a while to get where they understood how things were put together and what they could and could not touch. But that was one of the things that got me started on building out these dashboards with the information right there, so that even if you really don't know anything about our environment, I'm just going to tell you this is what you need to do because I know this information, right? It's a common request that you need to try to document things, so you can actually include SolarWinds as part of your overall push within the organization to document, the current states of things and the desired states of different systems within your environment. So if you can stack some intelligence into the dashboard, it goes a really long way. Okay, so we're going to go through and take a look at some examples of these different features here, but there's a few resources that I find really can be helpful that a lot of people haven't had a chance to really play with. So for example, using Network Atlas, you can go in there and create visual representations of things, so network topology diagrams, or you can take an application and get all of the related servers kind of grouped together, and you can show the hierarchy between them. You figure in most cases, most environments, if you deploy a new piece of software within the environment, there's typically going to be some kind of architectural diagram that someone has put together that shows, this is our database server. It connects on port 1433 to this application server. And then, within the SolarWinds environment, you might have front-end web servers. You might have a NetFlow database that's connected. There's all these different pieces of your application. So if someone has already taken a little bit of time and put together maybe a little Visio diagram or something along those lines, then you can load that information into Atlas and then have that load up alongside the view, so that way, even once again, if people aren't familiar with that application, they can still look at the view and then realize, oh, I see the relationships between these pieces, and this is the part that's down, so then I can figure out what I need to do to resolve. So applying the appropriate filters to the top XX resources is a really big one. So out of the box, there are several top 10 CPU load, top 10 interface utilization, all of that kind of thing. Out of the box, there are no filters applied to that. They're just giving you the top 10 no matter what. And you find that in most cases, if you don't have a very noisy environment, then you'll look at the top 10 and there will be 3 servers that are critical and then 1 in warning, and then all the rest of them on the list are at like 5 or 10% CPU load. They're well within the safe range. And so you don't really need them to be taking up 10 rows of screen space. You can just apply a filter to the resource and then condense it down and only show me systems that are above my warning threshold, for example. And so that's a pretty important one to get back to the idea of reducing the clutter and making the information on the screen actionable. So then another element that you might want to look into is charting. I find that a lot of people don't spend as much time as they could on building out charts. So I find that the most useful case when you're trying to think of where you would want to have a chart within SolarWinds is to think of things that are values that might be changing over time. And then people will typically have a case where like, okay, I see that CPU load is high right now, but what was the CPU load a little bit earlier? What time did CPU load start to pick up? Because maybe that'll give you some clues as to what's going on. You know, if the CPU load issue correlates to some other task or job that runs within the environment, if you have a batch job or even just, you know, your nightly backups, then that helps you to figure out what you're going to do to address it. If it's just the nightly backups, then maybe you don't have to worry about it and you can ignore it. But if it's outside of the common window, then there's something more unusual happening. So charting is especially important if you're going to be trying to set up anything where the time that something change has taken place is going to be relevant to how you're going to troubleshoot the issue. THWAC. So I'm hoping that you guys are all members of THWAC because it's probably one of the other major SolarWinds features is that the community there is massive. Almost any question you've come up with, someone is already asking it out there, or you can collaborate with other users who have that same pain point that you have to come up with solutions. So I actually recognize several of the names in here from THWAC posts that I've talked to, and you know, there's other SolarWinds MVPs in the attendees list right now. So the THWAC community is an extremely powerful resource. There's a lot of contests and things that they've run over the years. Thinking about dashboards specifically, there was one that they ran a few years ago called Rock the NOC, and I think when I very first started using SolarWinds, that one was a really helpful resource for me as I just looked at what people submitted for that and saw, you know, these are the ideas that other people have for what makes their dashboards good. And, you know, you could also see the votes that were driven on that. And you can figure out, well, also the consensus is that this is a good set of information. So that helped me to kind of guide my hand when I was first, you know, when you're new to SolarWinds, you're not sure what exactly you want to put up on the screen. You don't know even what you can necessarily. And so you can see where other people have gotten creative. And I think that leveraging THWAC is vital. Custom query resources. So this one is once again getting to kind of a more advanced use case, but the custom query resource, if you are familiar with the SWQL query language, then which is basically, it's pretty much the same as regular SQL with a few changes, but you can put together some extremely customized sets of data in there because I'll often say, meet people that want to see something where they're like, I want this set of servers, I want these metrics from those servers, and I need that correlated to this other piece of information. And it can sometimes be tricky depending on what kind of relationships you want to display to make those happen within the GUI-driven custom report builder or custom table builder. But with the custom query resources, you can put anything you want in there if you get creative with it. And the other big perk to the custom query resource is that it has a search box, because I've always felt every single page on SolarWinds should have some kind of search box, because if you have a large environment, there's a lot going on and you don't want to necessarily have to scroll through or hunt for things. So you can just search and say, show me what's going on with this particular system and all of the stats and things that I want to join to that. So those are some pretty good resources if you get familiarized with them and if you understand a little bit about SQL. And then Perf Stack is another good one. So this is a relatively new feature. It's only been out since I want to say version 12.1, maybe a little over a year now. But Perf Stack is a really fast way to correlate information. And I find that it's one that people haven't been leveraging enough, is that you can take everything related to a particular application or a particular slice of your network, and then you can stack those all up into a perf stack, save that view, share it out to your other teammates, and then pretty quickly, especially compared to the older ways where I was building dashboards for different applications teams, Perf Stack, I can knock something out in just a few minutes and get all the stats that we're interested in. And if you figure out that, this particular stat is not very useful, maybe I need to pull something else from one of these other servers, you can add those in, and it's really efficient. So we'll be walking through an example of building out some Perf Stack stuff, just as a quick demonstration of that, because I think it's pretty interesting. So with that, I'm going to kick off one of these polls here. So let's see. You guys should have a poll popped up on your screen here. And then the question there is, how many dashboards would you estimate that your organization needs? 0 to 5, 5 to 15, and going on from there. I think the approach that you take, sometimes it depends on how many dashboards you think you're going to build. If it's a small organization, then you can really afford to be very custom with it and do a lot of one-off things. But once you get into big companies and a lot of different users within the tool, then you really need to start thinking about efficiency and how to make sure that you don't get buried. So we'll let that poll run for a couple minutes, and then we'll pick back up, and we're going to get into some examples that we've got on here. Okay, so just hang tight for a minute. Okay, so it looks like we've got the majority of the people have voted on there. So just to read it off so that you guys, if you're interested in the results, sounds like about 22% of you said that you're going to be building between 0 and 5 dashboards. 59%, 6 to 15. And then 12% are in the 16 to 30 range. And then 8% of you said that you're going to be building 30 or more. So just to give you a feel, so it seems like, give or take a dozen is kind of a common range. I definitely have done a lot of engagements where that's usually the ballpark that I work in. So if you're going to be building out 30, dozens of dashboards, then there are some techniques that you can leverage using the SDK, and you can just kind of start to clone things and build out templates, and that can really streamline that process for you. Okay, so moving forward. Actually, we're not going into the Q&A right now. We're going to go into some examples that we've got. So at Loop One, we have a couple of different environments that we use for different labs and presentations and such. So I've pulled up some examples of things that we have put together on there, just so that you can see different things that I talked about in the presentation itself, and kind of see some real world examples. So this one kind of right here is just a basic little summary page. We've got a list of the nodes that are down. And then I always try to think in terms of whenever you get a notification on the screen, is there any other information that might help you to troubleshoot the issue or give you a little context around it? So just as an example, out of the box, there's a simple node down resource that just lists the names of every device that's down. But typically, I'm going to need a little bit more than that to kind of make a solution. So we might have the names of the nodes, their IP addresses. In this case, we've got an edit icon so that you can go in there and change something, and then when did it go down and how long has it been down. So that kind of information would help me to figure out, if I had several nodes that went down at the same time, then that might be a clue that something's wrong. In this case, this particular resource, we'd probably want to take a look at it because it looks like this is the duration of every unique downtime associated with that node. That's one of the things about building out custom things in a lab, is that some of these are going to be kind of a work in progress. But if you look around on Thwack, there are variations on this kind of report that have already been put out there. This one is leveraging the custom query resource. So just as an example, we can hit the edit on there. So you can see here, if you're familiar with SQL, this is just a elaborate SQL query hunting down events, and event type 5 is when a node down happens. So not to get into any of the details of actually how to build those out right now, it's kind of out of the scope of our project today, but that's one way to leverage a custom query resource. And then, so just as an example here to unmanaged and muted nodes, but we also want to include information, when was it unmanaged, when's it supposed to come back online, how many days do we have left, and who was it that unmanaged it. So all of that context information really builds into what I'm able to do. If I've just got a list of unmanaged devices, then now I actually have a lot more questions than I have answers. Who did it and why? And then in this case, we got a little resource here charting out the number of wireless clients associated with some of the SSIDs inside of our lab environment. And so you can see as different people come online, because if you start getting complaints that there's a particular time of day that your end users are feeling a lot of bottlenecks and it's slowing down the Wi-Fi, then you can take a look at this and see, like, oh, well, I guess, what was that? Monday around 2 a.m. is pretty quiet. And then by 4, although I assume this probably needs to be offset by the time zone. But in any case, this tends to be the window when we have the most activity on that particular SSID. Talking about the example that I mentioned before about having a dashboard that is focused on a particular subset of your environment or geared toward a particular user. This is an example of our SW admin view that I build. And so these metrics that I'm collecting here all have to do with the kind of the overall condition of my monitoring environment. And so these are the kinds of things that me as an admin that I'm interested in. So in this case, I've got a chart here showing my polling utilization over the last 30 days, because that way I can keep an eye out to see if any of my pollers are getting overloaded or unbalanced. If I have multiple polling engines, obviously in our little lab environment, we've only, it's low utilization, but in any kind of client environment, you kind of need to keep an eye out for these things. And then a resource breaking down all the pollers that I have, what type of poller they are, how many objects are associated with that poller, is it completing successfully, and how long has it been since we got information. So I tend to build a lot of these using SWQL because that's something that I'm comfortable in. This particular resource, I don't think that there's anything on it that I wouldn't be able to do by actually just pulling things in through the GUI. But getting back to the topic of making them easy for you to reproduce, for me, I can just go in here, hit the edit button on my example server, and then just copy and paste this information straight into a client environment, and then I'm good to go. So that's the kind of reason why for me, even if I could do it in just using the GUI, I'm going to be using SWQL because I can just copy and paste them, and it makes it very fast for me to deploy all this stuff into someone else's environment. If I was using the custom table resource, for example, then it's quite a bit more clicking around. Just to show you a little, to just get a taste of that. And so we got to go in there and configure the resource, and then it's going to ask us for our data source. And then I have to come through here and figure out what kind of objects that I want to do. And so I could say I want to report on a polling engine, or is it an engine? Yeah, see, and I don't even remember what the exact name is that they use inside of this GUI, and there's a huge list to scroll through. So that's getting back to my point about where if you know there's a way that's a little bit easier for you to clone these out, then it can be easy. You want to focus on what's the least effort for you as the administrator. Yeah, I'd have to hunt through it and try to figure out what they call that the Orion server, the polling information. I would have thought it was just polling server, but that's a good example. You know, within the SWQL, you can pull back all kinds of information that might not even be exposed in the GUI. So we'll just kind of move along here. This Orion node performance, this particular set of resources is has a lot of intelligence and logic built into here. So for example, all of these icons are set up to be tied back to the thresholds for that individual node. So you can see in this example, the memory utilization of our SQL database is over the critical threshold for that particular box. This one is a list of nodes with polling issues. You'll see if you look around on Thwack, there's several variations on this idea, but it's not uncommon within the SolarWinds environment to have nodes that are up where you can ping them, but SNMP has stopped working or your WMI account's disabled or something like that. And so they stay green, people think that they're still fine, but then when you drill into them, you realize you don't have any CPU metrics collected for the last 2 months. So this resource keeps an eye out for any case where basically the difference between the last time that we were able to pull stats like CPU and memory versus the last time that we pinged it. And if it gets to be more than an hour different, then I want to have that up on my dashboard because as the administrator, I need to fix that, you know. And then building off of that, we've also got interfaces that potentially have polling issues. So in this case, these are probably interfaces that no longer exist on the boxes. And then disk volumes that I need to keep an eye out for. So in this case, it's pretty clear that that node is down, and so that's why I can't access these. But this is just a list of different things that I find that are going to be important to me as the SolarWinds admin that I need to keep an eye out for. Different thresholds, you know, how many alerts do we have firing off on any given day? So once again, the SQL behind this particular chart for the alerts per day is available on Thwack. That's where I first came across it a couple years ago. But the idea, you know, how many alerts are firing off per day? Because once again, as the admin, maybe I'm firing too many alerts, maybe I'm not sending enough, or the people, you know, I don't know what's going on out there until I put something together for myself, a report or a chart or something to keep an eye on what the situation is. You know, in this case, it seems like pretty consistently in the lab environment, we're shooting out 400 to 500 messages a day, which to me seems really high for the size of this little lab. But I also know that we have all kinds of crazy things broken in the lab because that's what gives us, you know, data to work with. And then just different variations on counts, you know, how many alerts are firing and stuff. This is all the kinds of things that I would want to know about as the SolarWinds admin. And then moving into a different type of view, we have this audit. The particular server I'm on right now is our SolarWinds, our sales team uses this. And so they're very concerned with any of the other engineers coming in behind them and breaking their resources or, you know, screwing anything up. So they have the audit page, which shows the list of all the audit events, all the accounts and the users and what permissions they've got associated with, and all these user login events. You know, this is the kind of information that they're interested in because it helps them to keep track of changes within the environment so that they know who to come to if they find something's broken later on. So, you know, once again, this is geared toward a specific user or use case that you guys might have, keeping track of what's changing. We've also got an example of a NOC dashboard here, right? So NOCs are probably one of the more common examples of things. Within the NOC, they have to keep an eye out for different kinds of problems. They want to know whenever anything is going wrong. But to circle back to comments I had made before, you want to try to make this information as concise and actionable as possible. So just looking at this, for example, I've got my top nodes by average response time. And since this is all in a small little lab environment, these are pretty quick response times. Maybe I don't need to give up that big of a slice of my screen to just one particular resource that doesn't have anything that I actually need to fix on it. So this would be a good example where we would want to apply a filter to one of these top X resources. So in this case, there's already a filter to say this is only for servers and only where the status is not 2. 2 is the down status within SolarWinds. but I think we're going to apply a little bit more filter. So we're going to say, look at the node properties, and one of them is response time. There we go. So there's a couple variations on it. We've got the response time. This one would be the current right now response time or the average response time. I'm probably interested in kind of a rolling average of response time. And then I'll say, and response time is greater than, in the lab environment, if it was more than 100, that's probably kind of weird for us. So that might be where I set my threshold. But depending on your environment, you would have to poke around a little bit to figure out what range is concerning to you. In many environments, if you have a globally distributed environment, you might not be really worried about things until response times get into the 300 and 500 millisecond range, because that's just typical within that set of servers. And so applying the filter collapses this down so that now, instead of having 10 rows of information that doesn't help me to fix anything because it's just fine, now we've just got this, and it's just a little bit more compact, and we can kind of move on to other things that are maybe more pressing. I didn't even see that I had a bunch of nodes that are burning up all of the memory utilization, So by collapsing that, it allows me to only focus on things that have issues I need to fix. And the same idea here for nodes with average CPU load, 30% CPU load, I'm not going to do anything about that. That sounds totally healthy to me. So pop this open, look through the node properties, and we're going to be looking for CPU load. There we go. And so copy that guy. And CPU load is greater than, let's just say, 50%. Another good idea if you're applying filters here is to just mention it in the subtitle, so that way when people look at the resource, once again, that kind of drives their awareness of what they're looking at and makes things a little bit more simple. So servers with greater than 50% CPU load. There we go. That way, if someone's new to the environment, they don't really know about all of the different settings that I have, then it'll be a little bit easier for them to get up to speed. There we go. And so now that's helped me to collapse all of these irrelevant pieces of information down, and I can apply the same kind of filters here, only show nodes that are above maybe 80% memory utilization, and maybe we would exclude SQL servers or something like that. There's a lot of ways to approach this. If you look around on Thwack, I have a resource that I put out there that's actually it's full SQL, but it goes through here, and instead of having a flat ceiling where it says 80% or higher, I could say only show me nodes that are above their individual thresholds, and then that way it will exclude SQL servers if I actually go in here and set their threshold to be higher, which is generally what you're going to want to do. Getting back to that topic of not leaving issues unaddressed on your dashboard, if it's normal for the SQL server to be using 81% of memory, that's pretty conservative on the SQL side. So you really do want to adjust your thresholds there. So just to show you guys, if you're not familiar with how to adjust individual one-by-one thresholds, you want to just go in here and edit, and then it'll be at the very bottom of the screen on the edit nodes. There are a list of thresholds that you can adjust, and when it gets there, that'll turn this green, and that should just make it a little bit more helpful for us to keep track of what's going on. So there we go, CPU load, memory utilization. And so you can look at this latest baseline details. If you've never seen that resource, it's really helpful. But you can see the typical range for this box is between 76 and 82%. So like they're saying, 83%, 85%, those are pretty believable thresholds. And so that's fine. I'll go with those recommendations. 83, 85. You could also use the use baseline button, but I just look at the information and then figure it out for myself what I want my thresholds to be, because I am a little bit of a control freak in that way. So once it commits that change to the threshold, I should be able to refresh this view. And at least that CRM SQL, it'll still be on that chart, but it won't be in red or yellow. Oh wait, yeah, this particular resource, it's hard-coded because it's not sensitive to your thresholds. So that's another argument for setting up custom ones. Okay. So real quick, I'm going to kick off one of the other polls. Let's see. So the question here is, do you use view limitations when building your dashboards? Just a yes or no? I'm just curious to get a sense of how many of you guys are familiar with doing the view limitations.
Hey, Mark, while the poll's running, a couple of questions have come through. One is just a quick one. What is your username on Thwack?
Gotcha. So that's, it was on the second slide there, but it's Mesverrum, MESVERRUM. I apologize for that being completely impossible to remember, but hopefully we'll be able to attach that maybe to the email when we send everything out. And...
Sure, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that'll make it easier for people.
This one's just a compliment. It says the CPU and MEM heat map resources are very nice. So there you go.
Yeah, that was actually one of our other engineers, Amit, had made that one, I believe. And so, yeah, if you're creative with things, you can find a lot of different ways to present your data and kind of make things more helpful to you, you know. So I think that's one of the cool things within SolarWinds is you can come up with all kinds of crazy resources.
Cool. This question is, I have a team requesting a dashboard with charts. Will you be covering how to do one?
Definitely, yeah. We building out charts is really important. So we'll look at a couple different ways to do them, like using the custom charting tool and also using the Perf Stack, because I like using Perf Stack for charts these days. It's so slick looking.
Cool. So that's something that is available for someone to, like, a customized situation that you can help them with?
Yep.
Cool. If anyone else has questions as they come in, here's a couple more. Is there an easy way to dump/report on CPU memory warning error thresholds for all nodes?
Yeah, so let's go ahead. It looks like the majority have voted on the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll out, and then I'll show you guys how to adjust the threshold globally. To do them not quite globally is a little bit trickier, but there's a couple ways. We'll take a look at that real quick. Yeah, so let me close that poll out. And so, like you guys see here, the limitation builder, it looks like about a third of you have used the view limitation builder with your dashboards, and then 2/3 have said, no, you haven't used it. So definitely when building out dashboards, especially if they're maybe team driven, then the limitation builder is a good technique to take a look at. So we'll spin that up really quick though, to answer the question about the globally changing the thresholds. You can go into your main settings here, and then Orion thresholds, I believe, is the correct one. It might be NPM thresholds. We'll find out in a second. There we go. So Orion general thresholds, average CPU load. So this one would work globally if you want to do it for every server in the environment. And then if you need to do a subset of them, you can do it from managed nodes. And basically, if you just put a checkbox in all of the servers that you want, then you can grab them all at the same time and apply a change to their thresholds. So let me say, like, for example, I want to change the thresholds for all of my Windows boxes. So I group by vendor, select Windows, hit select all here, and then edit properties. And so then it'll give the same edit node screen that we were looking at a minute ago. It'll have that, and you can just jump to the bottom and tweak your threshold globally. So like so. I'm going to roll through a few of the other examples quickly because I see we're coming kind of tight on time, and dashboards can get, there's a million things to look at there.
Yeah. Mark, you're showing the poll, but not your screen.
Oh, got you. Let me hide that. Sorry about that, guys.
That's all right. And we have 2 more questions that have come in.
So what I was
squeeze them in.
Yep. So I was saying here, under the main settings, and then Orion general thresholds right here, that's where you would globally set your CPU load threshold. And then if you want to do a subset of the environment, you can go to manage nodes right here, and then select them, group them up by whatever property they have in common, and then just select them all at the same time, and then hit the edit button for multiple systems at the same.
So this other question is, what ports need to be open to monitor the servers in a DMZ?
That is kind of elaborate. It depends exactly what you need to do. If you're applying a polling engine in there, which is what a lot of people will do, then you need the ports for the polling engine to reach back to your SQL database and for it to reach your primary application server. That's typically 1433 and 17777, I think. There is a SolarWinds guide for their ports. Requirements, I believe. But there's some KB articles. Here we go. Port requirements for SolarWinds products. This one breaks down all of the ports that you would need open for different things. So it really depends on what you're trying to monitor for. And yeah, that's basically the main things, is what you're trying to monitor and what modules you have available. But this document right here has been a candidate for you to take a look at. Let me close that guy out there.
Yeah, another question that came in.
Just to show you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Marc. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Well, so this one is just a quick example of the executive summary. You always want to take your audience into consideration. The executive summary is not going to be as interested in maybe the nitty-gritty details of particular CPU loads or anything. They're usually looking at things just in aggregate. You know, they want counts of, you know, overall what's going on. I got this many alerts, these many objects being monitored, and this many app monitors, and this is their different statuses. And maybe this capacity forecasting summary query, for example, is one that I put together that says, you know, how many interfaces do I have coming up that are running out of capacity? Because maybe we need to plan for budgeting purposes if we need to expand our available resources. So, you know, take into consideration the audience when you're building out the resources that are on any given dashboard. This tab right here, this L1S virtualization one, is geared toward those errors, like I was saying before, like the VM tools that are out of compliance. So you could easily put this one together using the custom table resource, and it would just get a list of the names of every VM that doesn't have VM tools installed. And that way you don't have to get, in this case, in my tiny environment, I have 37 VMs. I wouldn't need 37 unique emails on that. This one right here is an example of doing some charts alongside them. So in this case, I've got my list of nodes that have high memory utilization, and only the ones that are critical I set up to go into this chart. Typically, you can just get away with the top 5, but I was trying to get fancy with it. So just to show you how we might spin up a chart on here, let me customize the page, and we will add a custom chart resource. There we go. Drop that guy in here. So we'll give it a name. This will be our top memory utilization. Yep. And we select our data source. This is what kind of objects do I want on this chart. I want to report on nodes. And then, so we'll just say all nodes. We don't have to apply any more filter than that. But if you were doing one for a particular team, you might look for a custom property that you're using to tag that team or something along those lines. Then we'll say, how long do I want to go? So I'm going to say over the last 24 hours. What data do I want to chart out here? So I'm going to say memory, and then let's go for average % memory used. I want that to be a line chart. You can do columns or areas, whatever the case may be, but there's going to be several lines on this one, so this is the most logical one. It's going to be laid out by this timestamp. And then data grouping, we're going to group them by the node's name. So say node caption, and we'll have the legend also display the caption so you can see which one it is. And a sample interval of every 15 minutes. You always want to make sure your sample intervals are at least as large as the polling interval for whatever stat you're looking at. So in my lab environment, memory is collected every 10 minutes. So anything that's at least every 10 minutes will be fine. If I did a 1-minute chart, there's going to be a bunch of gaps on there. So we'll just do that. And then in this case, let's say only show the top 5 sorted by average memory utilization descending. Oh, womp womp must have got something. Let's try that. display units, data sources, all nodes. Unless, of course, there's someone else has already put a filter on this view that I'm not aware of. Oh man, way to die and choke in crunch time. All nodes, average percent memory used. Try that. Yeah, I'm not, all nodes where, no, that should be fine. We don't need to have any filter on here. Well, how unfortunate.
That's okay.
Of course, the resource doesn't want to cooperate. Yeah, we'll move on to other topics. That's the basic idea there. Obviously, it did work before on this one. You define your data source, figure out who you want it, and then what stats you want to show on there.
Okay, one last question. We're a little over, so just a short answer on this one is, you've mentioned the SDK a few times. Is that something that you can help me get trained on?
Yeah, we definitely do training on it. We have some advanced server training classes for Loop 1 that we do on-site or remotely, or you can look around on Thwack. There's actually an SDK subsection under NPM, and I think it's under SAM too. So both of those places will give you good ways to learn about how to use the SDK. There's a Wikipedia associated with it. So
cool. Well, there's some other questions that have come in that we'll make sure, Marc, that you get so you can answer them offline. We want to thank everyone that attended. Awesome turnout, especially for an earlier morning webinar. Thank you, Marc, for the awesome job and sharing your expertise with everyone. The next webinar will be in about a month from now. We don't have the date set in May yet, but it's going to be on compliance, and we'll be featuring another one of our members of the Loop 1 Mind, and you'll be getting information on that. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded. If you attended, you will automatically get an email with the link, and then we will be posting it on our YouTube channel and our blog in a few days. So thank you again, and hope you have an awesome day.